Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Unlocking Rural Business Potential digital event, hosted by the CMI East Midlands and East Midlands and Eastern Regional Board. My name is Michael, and I am an Events Delivery Manager at CMI, and I'll shortly be handing over to Sarah and Tom, who will begin today's event. If you have registered and you have submitted any questions, they will be answered during the Q&A, and you do have the opportunity to ask questions live using the live chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you later today for those of you who have booked to attend, and the event recording will also be available on the CMI website and the CMI YouTube channel. So now over to Sarah Gibson, Board Secretary, and Tom Lee, Finance Lead for the East Midlands and Eastern Regional Board, to begin today's event.
Thank you, Michael. That's great. Welcome everyone to our rural business event. I want to introduce our speaker today, Anna. Anna's a market product and business development specialist with over 20 years international experience across multiple sectors, with organisations ranging from micro businesses to FTSE 100 organisations. Through her activity in the rural space, Anna's worked with the Prime Minister's Office, various government departments, as well as giving evidence to a House of Lords Select Committee. She formed close working relationships and partnerships with organisations including Amazon, O2, Openreach, NFU Mutual, and many academic and research organisations. Anna's also appeared on BBC Countryfile as a rural business expert and is a regular speaker and facilitator, including speaking at the OECD Rural Development Conference and on various panels for the CMI. Anna's a passionate advocate for neurodiversity and has spoken on the topic for ACAS at their diversity conference. Anna is now founder and managing director of Human, a new EDI platform facilitating big, bold conversations to change the world of work, helping people and organisations to navigate the dynamic world of inclusion. Now I'm going to hand you over to Anna to set the scene before we ask some questions of our expert. Thank you, Anna.
Hi, everybody, and thank you to the CMI for asking me to speak today. What I first of all wanted to really get across is that the rural economy as it stands is very much intrinsic to the national economy of the UK and also to the global economy. The rural economy is like an interconnected web, really, and the small businesses that operate in our rural areas enable bigger businesses, which in turn enable rural communities to function and to thrive and survive. From electricians to childcare providers, pubs, village shops, and things like that, everything contributes to this interconnected web. And the thing that holds it all together is this connection to the land. So the natural capital of the United Kingdom, this land, is fundamental, really, to many large corporations, from food producers to retailers, within research and production, and also not forgetting the tourism sector, agri-chemicals, agri-tech, and everything in between. And it's very much, our rural businesses quite often go unnoticed and just kind of fit in there. So whilst the land itself is central to this, what the rural economy isn't is just about agriculture and primary production. Rural businesses really are no different to those businesses that are based in urban cities and urban towns, really, and the impact that they can make to the economy. It's just that we face some very unique challenges in operating businesses out of the rural areas of the UK. Things like infrastructure, service infrastructure has always been quite difficult, and we all know the challenges that we have with broadband if we're located rurally, and often 5G, mobile signals, etc. But there's also that people element where we're talking about labour retention and skills. And there's also really very much, like I've just mentioned, touched on there's a lack of awareness of the contribution that rural businesses make to the national economy. So I'm sure we will be diving into these subjects in a little bit more detail as we go on. And I welcome any questions that people have, really.
Fantastic, Anna, thank you. So if we dive into some of our questions, the first one would be, really, what would you say the benefits are of working for a rural business?
Well, the benefits, I'd say, are varied and many, but I think after the last period of time since COVID, I think we can all say that one of the major benefits of living and working rurally, as we do, as many of us do, is the impact that it can have on your health and well-being. I mean, living and working, being able to walk out of your front door and sort of experience this natural capital that we have here in the UK, beautiful countryside. It's obviously very good for mental health. The pace of life is often slower, so it allows us to kind of get a bit more work-life balance. And our rural communities, very much value-driven and impact-driven rather than being just hustle and bustle and all go. Although I have to say a lot of them are very dynamic and varied as well. So the benefits, I think quality of life would have to be one of the main ones, I would say. And then setting up businesses, the opportunity to set up smaller businesses, to start from home. We've all noted, I suppose, the rise of remote working. So even people who don't run their own businesses or don't work for rural organisations still have the opportunity now to benefit from that slower pace of life, the quality of life in rural areas, because so many organisations are enabling remote working now. So probably the main one is that quality of life, but there are many, many more. So
yeah, absolutely. And do you think rural businesses sometimes struggle to attract staff? And if so, what do you think some of them could do to improve that?
I think we have had a problem, I think, in that historically, people are born in rural communities quite often, and, we've proliferated towards towns and cities. But growing up, certainly my generation, when we were born in a rural area, it's like, no, I want to go to the city, I want to go to university, and people have moved out of rural areas. So there has been a bit of a skills drain and a bit of a drain of young people moving out of rural areas and into cities. And that has, I suppose, over time led to a lack of available talent within rural areas. So one of the challenges of working within a rural business is, like you say, attracting that staff, the talent to come back either to rural areas or, to encourage people to stay. Again, it's sometimes out of rural businesses' hands in doing that, because like I say, the infrastructure hasn't always been there to enable people to, log on and have remote sessions like this. And I think that, again, what COVID has done, if we look at it from the positive angle, is enable people to join more rurally based businesses or to work rurally where they haven't always necessarily done before. So I think as rural businesses, what we need to do is prioritise and publicise the positive aspects of working in a rural area. Obviously, in order to attract the best talent, you have to incentivize people as well to come and work for rural businesses. So that's in terms of offering good remuneration and benefits, but that's the same as any business. So again, that's not a rural specific problem. I think highlighting the values of your rural business will be increasingly important to attract. I mean, we hear a lot of talk about Gen Z these days, and that they're value driven rather than remuneration driven. So it's highlighting the values that you have and the connection that you have, perhaps to sustainable business or whatever it is, to attract that talent and to attract people that also share those values with your organisation.
Yeah, I guess it may be a broad brush, Anna, but do you think that rural businesses tend to bend more towards the sustainability aspect, and therefore they can use that to attract more people in who, that might be a particular interest for them?
Yeah, I think traditionally, because rural businesses at their heart have land around them, and many of them are attached to the land in some way, shape or form, not necessarily through primary production, but for example, if you live in a village like I do, you have a lot of agricultural land around you or farming land, and then you've got small businesses then that then support all the workers on the farm. So you do have, you have the pubs, the hospitality venue, you have the childcare providers, the electricians and all that. So yes, I think all of those businesses. So if you take construction as an example, there are a lot more thoughtful, and always has been a lot more thoughtful, construction companies who are operating out of rural areas and using traditional methods of construction and things like that. And way before it was trendy or, sustainability was a thing, it was always there. The respect for the land has always been there. So I do think it's an intrinsic part of rural business, not all of them, and I am speaking very generally, but I do think there's always been an awareness because of where we live and that how important the land is to many of our businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say rural businesses should be doing to both retain and develop their existing staff and preventing any skills drain, people wanting to move away into a big city? What can those businesses do you think, to keep their staff?
Again, I think it's about incentivization, but it's also about training and developing, giving them opportunities to be as good as they would be were they based in a city or town. And there's absolutely no reason these days that can't happen. I mean, CMI training obviously can all be done remotely, making sure that there is access to these things, that you set up mentoring, so that just because you're remote as a business does not mean that you can't be connected. And I think historically perhaps there was an element of rural businesses feeling somewhat isolated and lacking the ability to network. But that certainly, again, doesn't have to be the case anymore. So it's giving people opportunity. We don't have to sit in our rural little office and not be connected. You can do that online now. But equally, give people opportunities to go and work in the city for a bit. Organisations, some of the big organisations now do transfer skills, do second people out, and getting out into the countryside, I would say, is a great opportunity for any young people, really. Certainly value driven people entering the world of work, and as older ones, I suppose. That I keep forgetting that people often do choose changes of career now and everything else. So yeah, thinking about those values and giving people opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. So switching then slightly to talk about managers specifically, do you think there are any specific challenges for managers in rural businesses, such as diversity of people they might be able to attract in?
Yeah, I think because we're operating from I think you would call it a reduced talent pool, because your communities are smaller and you've got that reduced talent pool to select from. We've always thought that people have to be there in person. I think it's slowly changing again, and we're widening that pool of talent that we can access through remote working, etc. But I think one of the things that I do notice more and more, because I'm now in this very much in the diversity and inclusion space, there is and has been a huge lack of diversity in rural communities. Again, I'm seeing change recently. You've always had, if you think about agriculture and farming, you've always had migrant workers coming in for seasonal jobs in farming and agriculture, and that has always been to the benefit of rural communities. I think certainly where I'm from in Leicestershire, it's quite diverse from the perspective of having people from different countries, like I say, coming in and teaching us different ways and doing that seasonal work. But what I don't see an awful lot of in rural spaces is the broader diversity in terms of, not necessarily, ethnic mix has always been a challenge. You get people moving out in terms of, I think there was, I don't know whether it was the fast show, but it was The Only Gay in the Village, wasn't it? You kind of, the sexuality side of things, LGBTQT, that there is a lack of diversity, and I think it's slowly changing, but it's up to our rural communities again and rural businesses to be able to embrace that and think about people as a whole and what they can bring, and really embrace others, embrace difference, see the value that people can bring. So I'd like to see diversity in rural areas increasing. But again, historically, one of the challenges that we've had for managers, isolation. So you manage people in a manager's job most of the time, and in rural areas it can be difficult to make those connections. And I think small rural businesses do tend to have very close relationships with other people that work there, because they probably all socialize as well outside of work. So isolation, there's lots of family dynamics as well in rural businesses. Quite often there's generational changes in businesses, so certainly in farming and agriculture they pass down through families. Stereotyping, I think there has traditionally been a stereotyping of rural businesses in being somehow less than businesses that are founded in cities and towns, looking at us like we're a bit less, but yokely. Can I say that? I don't know whether I can. So it's that awareness of the contribution. If we can raise the awareness of the contribution that our businesses are making to bigger businesses, some of the big food producers, Nestle, some of the big retailers, Marks and Spencer's, that sort of business would not survive if it were not for other organisations and businesses in rural areas doing the groundwork on the land, either whether it's research-based or primary production. They wouldn't survive. Your agri-chemicals businesses wouldn't survive if they didn't have the test beds, they didn't have the fields and the land to test their chemicals on. And the same with the agri-tech, robotics, things like that. You're attached to the land. So I think it's all about people for managers, isn't it? And making sure that your people are happy, that they are connected, that they feel included and are not isolated.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think as an economy then, as in the rural business economy, do you think that's moving in the right direction in terms of diversity? I think you said before there's been a few changes, obviously a way to go, as there is for all of us probably. Do you see it moving in the right direction?
I think it's very slow, and I think it's much slower in rural areas than it is necessarily in towns and cities, because you can't be what you can't see, is what we say, isn't it? And that lack of diversity in rural areas means that people, if they can't see themselves, they're not gonna make the move, either move back to rural areas, or if they can't see themselves in the rural area that they were born and brought up in, then they will move out. But I think it is slowly changing. But I do think it's one of our challenges as people who live and work in rural areas, to ensure that, again, everybody does feel included, and that you are trying to bring in diverse talent. Whether it's women in traditional male-dominated businesses, whether it's people from different ethnic backgrounds, people with different sexual preferences, social mobility, people who have never been to university, going to university, but coming back to our rural areas. So ensuring, and it's a societal change, it's not just a rural problem, but I do see it as being slightly slower in rural areas than it is in towns and cities.
Yeah, okay. You mentioned already, Anna, about the agri-tech industry and some of the big household names that rely so much on rural business production or skills. But what skills are in demand for rural businesses? Various types of innovation, technology. There's so much going on. What are the sort of big players at the minute, would you say?
I mean, there's a huge amount of work going into carbon capture. Sort of working on our land, so carbon sinks, etc. There's a lot of work on carbon credits. There's no kind of agreed way forward on any of that, so it's very much an emerging market. So this is the whole sustainability thing and ESG. I think there's huge potential, certainly in terms of research and in terms of development of programs, approaches, processes, to enable us to reach, this the net zero targets that we all have. Organisations across the country and across the world are now looking to the environment to, still be there. We are making progress, not as fast as we need to, but there are so many careers, if you start to think about it, within the rural space that are attached to the land that relate to sustainability in some way, shape or form. So environmental sciences, all kind of science subjects, but then engineering, tech. If you think about AI and how we use robotics in farming, because nobody wants to be, up to the knees in mud picking broccoli on the fens of Lincolnshire in the middle of or at the start of the winter when it's all wet. So there's been a lot of movement in robotics. So there are some really, really interesting, challenging careers. They don't have to be all related to agriculture, like I say, and the opportunities are huge, I think, to really use your imagination and see where small businesses, big businesses, innovative businesses can support primary production and businesses on the land. I mean, we've not even touched on tourism really and outdoor pursuits, but using the land very much for that well-being, mental health side of things, that will be up and coming as well, I believe, whilst looking after the land and making sure those businesses are sustainable as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many exciting and interesting projects going on, aren't there, at the minute? It's again, that can be used as part of an attraction strategy for a small rural business, can't it? Really painting the picture of what careers are available and the exciting tech advancements that are being made.
100%. You only have to do a little bit of research and scratch beneath the surface, I think, and you start to see some very, very interesting projects, innovative projects as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thank you, Anna. I think we're going to hand over to Tom now, who's got some pre-submitted and some live questions to go through. Thank you very much, Anna.
You're welcome.
Yeah, hi there. So there's some questions that have come in. Please use the live chat and submit some more questions, and we can put those to Anna as we go through. But the first question here is from Aileen. So how do you attract people to the rural area where there is little or no infrastructure? For instance, public transport or higher housing costs, lack of schools and minimal NHS services?
I think, what I would say is that the challenges are very, very real in this regard. And there's been, and I'm not getting into politics with a big P, but there's been systemic neglect really of our rural areas in terms of public services. And what we need to do is all of us work to change this. I suppose we can, exercise our rights to vote and to change things. And to just be aware of what we can do as communities to make things better in that regard. Whilst acknowledging that it's not necessarily a problem that we can influence alone. So again, engaging with local authorities, making sure that we're getting involved when we're being asked about our local communities, rural communities, making sure that our voices are heard, raising the challenges that you face as rural business. So affecting change really is easier through community action, and we see that an awful lot in rural areas. I think we need to, again, I'm going back to the point where we really need to focus on the positives of being rurally based, because these are the things that we know to be true. We can't change, service infrastructure ourselves, but focusing on the positives, making sure that we are looking after each other and our rural communities are looking after each other, do what we can do, and focus on the broader implications for quality of life, and that the opportunities out there are endless. And, we need innovative people and we need entrepreneurs in this space. So rural's ripe for change. It's a great place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And are there opportunities for rural businesses to work together to help demonstrate the value of working in these regions?
Yeah, and I think that a lot of what we see in rural areas, it's like this infrastructure. So it's like a local multiplier effect, isn't it? So you have very many, and I can't state enough really the impact of, you might not think that you are contributing much just as a childcare provider or just as a small electrician, but actually the work of these small businesses really does underpin everything else that's happening in our rural communities. So working together, partnering, small businesses partnering as providers for the bigger businesses that are out there, and that's, they are looking to do that, and we need to be pushing that more and more. So I think saying to rural businesses as well, so small rural businesses, don't lack ambition, have that ambition, because big businesses start from somewhere, don't they? So small businesses turn into bigger businesses. So don't lack that ambition just because you feel like you're only making a small contribution.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's another question here from Inga. So what makes a rural business different from urban ones in your view?
I think I touched on it in the introduction, really. I don't think in terms of the contribution that rural businesses can make, there is any difference whatsoever. There shouldn't be any difference. You should not be able to tell the difference between a business based rurally and a business based in the city in terms of the contribution that they're making to the economy. What we do have and the challenges that we face are around service infrastructure, around higher costs to deliver the same services, because things cost more to transport, to purchase. You have that skills drain. You have to attract talent. An example, when we set up the Rural Business Awards in 2015, my business partner and I, former business partner and I, we were looking for a grant to get some young people into work for us. And we were denied that grant because we weren't on a major bus route. So transportation network might not seem like a thing because everybody drives a car. But what happens if you don't drive a car and you're a young person and you can't get to work? And then rural businesses are penalised because they're in a rural area. So there are many, many challenges, but I know rural businesses are incredibly resilient. they are masters of making things up as they go along and changing things if they're not right. So the flexibility to change and that resilience is outstanding in rural areas. And I think that's the challenges that we face are many and varied, but they are always faced headlong, and businesses are resilient in the whole in rural areas because they've had to be.
Yeah. Okay, so there's another question here from Ross. So how difficult is it to ensure that your business remains sustainable whilst embracing sustainable business development?
I think, like I said, by their nature, rural businesses are sustainable. And I think it's just keeping an eye to that. So they are intrinsically connected to the land. And like I say, intrinsically sustainable as well. So ensuring that you are undertaking business development, I suppose transport's another big one there, because you don't want to be driving around the countryside, polluting it, whatever. It's embracing this ability to network remotely, undertake business development from a remote place. Obviously, again, that's a challenge in some places because connectivity is not great. But it's funny, isn't it, that during COVID, it was a massive problem before COVID. And then suddenly during COVID, we've had to move very quickly to being able to have online meetings. And from my perspective, it's not been quite as much of a challenge as we might have thought it was before COVID. We've suddenly made strides in being able to access remote networking and things like that. So in terms of business development, it can be challenging because of rural location. But again, there are ways to overcome that now. And I mean, I know I do still travel and I jump on the train when they're running and travel into London. But I make sure that I'm there for a couple of days and I'm doing all my business while I'm down there. And then I'm coming back and, able to access remotely as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So a question here from, it's two questions actually, from Kalyani. So how to start a localization business in a rural area in the UK, but also a related question to starting businesses from Anne-Marie. And that's, what is the best way to research your local rural business idea? I'd like to start a new business, but I'm not sure how to research the viability of my plan. So really some ideas about setting up businesses within the rural area and perhaps whether there's things out there to assist with that.
Yeah, I think there isn't a lot of support out there for certainly starting a rural business, small rural businesses. There hasn't been. Obviously, there are a lot of organisations, and obviously I'd say come and get involved with the CMI because there's a lot of skills development that you can do there. So it's making sure that you have the right skills in order to start and grow a business. Equally, in terms of research, there are some rural specific organisations. There's the Rural Services Network, which has an awful lot of great content available online, freely available online, with regards to statistics and things like that. So accessibility. So it's just, the government also provides a lot of, for the Office of National Statistics, there is readily available information on rural. In terms of more localized business, I think it's just a case of going out and talking to communities. I would always, from a startup person perspective, as an entrepreneur, that's what I do. You have to start somewhere. I think you can sometimes do too much research or think that you've got to do too much research before starting. But the best research is often going out and talking to people, starting it, trying it, getting feedback. In terms of whether there's an addressable market out there, I think your gut quite often tells you whether there is or there isn't. And then using statistics to back that up and see, it's amazing what you can find on the internet these days. But there are always people out there that will help as well. So it's connecting via Facebook. There are a load of different rural business groups on Facebook, rural community groups, Plunkett Foundation, via your local pub. Go and ask somebody down the pub how they've got on. I know working in villages and towns, small market towns, chambers of commerce can sometimes be quite helpful. So it's all the traditional routes. Test them out, see what's available. I can't speak for every area of the UK, obviously, but there is help out there. I think you've just got to go looking.
Yeah, I think one of the key things there that you said is getting out there and talking to people and other businesses. I think there's probably lots of support from the community out there to aid that.
Yeah, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Absolutely. So you mentioned earlier about businesses of different sizes supporting rural businesses and the fact that lots of rural businesses support larger businesses. With a CMI perspective on that, what's the relevance of the formal management training that perhaps small or rural businesses might have?
Oh, right. Where did I get to? I've got all my notes here. So I think it's always relevant, isn't it? To undertake formal management training is always relevant, and we never stop learning. I think as soon as we decide to stop learning, careers are over, really, because whether it's talking to people or formal learning in terms of education, it's not just the education that's important, it's the people that you meet along the way. And I know that CMI has been an incredible network for me, and you guys, I'm sure, would back that up as well, getting involved with the boards and things like that. I think it brings us together. So, Midlands and East board, you're meeting other people from across a load of different organisations, I'm sure, in the work that you do on the board. So not only are you developing your skills and getting some formal qualifications, it's that networking, it's learning how to communicate with people from different backgrounds, the advocacy work that you do, and the networking. It's always going to be relevant. I can't state enough that certainly when you are somewhat isolated in a rural business, maybe geographically isolated, joining networks and the opportunity to tap into networks like the CMI have developed are great. And you get that through doing your formal training. So start the process. There's something for everybody as well, I'd say. So whether you're, senior management or just entering the world of management, there's something there for everybody, and it's never going to be a waste of time. So very, very relevant for everybody, not just rural businesses, but as well as rural business people.
Absolutely. All business shapes, sizes and types.
100%.
So Anna, if I could perhaps ask you for your three main sort of takeaway points from today's discussion then, and if people were to go away from this taking three things, what would they be?
Let's have a look. I think whatever businesses can do in cities, rural businesses can do as well. There's no a disadvantage, really. There are disadvantages, but there's no reason why rural businesses can't be as successful as businesses in towns and cities. Certainly
just
with
different challenges and opportunities, I guess.
Yeah, with remote working now being a thing. We have a visibility problem. Rural businesses have a visibility problem. It's not that they're not there. It's just that we can't see them. And they underpin so many big businesses and enable them to operate. So I think scratching the surface, kind of take that away. Scratch beneath the surface and you will find some kind of rural business, I'm sure, underpinning what's going on in big businesses. I would also say my final point is that rural businesses are the future. If you think that sustainability is the future, then rural businesses are also the future, because we're the custodians of the land that, isn't developed yet. And rural businesses will continue, I hope and pray, to look after that land and look after the natural capital of this country. So that being said, sustainability is the future. Looking after the planet is the future. So therefore, rural businesses are the future.
That's great to hear. Anna, it's been very insightful and fascinating to listen to you today.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much for coming on here and talking to us all.
You're very
and,
welcome.
and joining myself and Sarah for this talk. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I think I'm now handing back to Michael.
Indeed. Thank you so much for such an insightful discussion. And unfortunately, we have come to the end. So I want to extend a big thank you to all of you who've joined us, and of course to Anna and to Sarah and to Tom for your contributions and for hosting today's event. Don't forget, if you are a member of CMI, you can log into Management Direct using the link in the live chat, and you can find a wide range of exclusive and practical development resources and much more. And if you are not yet a member or a subscriber, you can join our community via the link that's also in the live chat to gain full access to our Management Direct portal. And you can also sign up for the free CMI newsletter for the latest trends and tips for managers and leaders. So thank you again for joining us, and do enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all.